Snow fell outside the kitchen window in slow white flakes, the kind that makes a Chicago street look clean for a few minutes, while Dean sat across from me rehearsed and calm. He held his whiskey glass near his mouth without drinking and said he was spending Christmas and New Year's at a lodge near Lake Geneva with Mallory. And I was not coming. I set my mug down because my hand had started to shake, and he kept going in that flat, prepared voice people use when they have already decided your part. He said Mallory understood his world better, understood holiday service, donor dinners, vendor calls before dawn, the pressure of a dining room that never cared whether anyone slept. He looked straight at me and added that I was always somewhere else, always on tour, always landing late, always asking for one more adjustment. And Mallory never made him feel managed. I remember staring at the condensation on his glass because it was easier than looking at my husband while he explained another woman to me like she was a practical correction. Then he said the part that told me this was not a confession but an arrangement, that Mallory had already planned the lodge tables, the meals, the entire week. He even gave me the detail about the reservation being handled through a friend of his, as if that closed the subject, then leaned back and said I had no reason to make this ugly. When I asked whether he was really telling me he planned to spend the holidays playing house with his mistress, his mouth tightened, and he answered that if I insisted on calling it that, maybe divorce would be cleaner. The room went still after that. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just emptied out, like something had been carried off while I was still sitting there pretending I was included. Dean did not apologize, did not stumble, did not try to soften the blow, because the cruelty was not accidental anymore. It was built into how carefully he had chosen every word. I looked at the man I had shared a home with and understood the worst part in one cold turn of thought, that he was not asking me to forgive betrayal. He was informing me that he had already begun replacing me. I did not sleep after that dinner, and by morning the shock had hardened into something cleaner. Because the moment I stopped defending Dean, the last 8 months changed shape. Details I had dismissed as timing or stress began lining up with dates, charges, and images. And once they started fitting together, I could not force them back apart. The problem was no longer whether something had happened between Dean and Mallory, but how long they had been building a version of his life that worked better without me in it. 2 weeks earlier, Mallory had posted a holiday centerpiece on her business story, and in the dark reflection of a window behind the candles, Dean's shoulder had appeared. When I showed it to him that night, he barely glanced up from his phone and told me I was tired. And I had let that answer sit because exhaustion sounded easier than betrayal. Now that same reflection came back sharp enough to cut, because it was no longer just a shadow in glass. It was evidence that he had already grown comfortable being visible beside her. Once I opened our shared account history, the rest stopped looking isolated and started behaving like a pattern that repeated every few days, with almost insulting consistency. There were boutique hotel charges on nights Dean claimed he was sleeping near the club after late private service, always paired with wine, room dining, or transport far from home. There were smaller purchases I had skimmed past for months. Imported chocolates, hand-poured candles, a silk scarf, and then a photo from Mallory's page where she wore that same winter green around her neck. Mallory had entered our lives as the event stylist Dean hired for donor dinners and seasonal tables, the woman who made expensive rooms feel intimate before guests arrived. Then she kept appearing in places that were not supposed to belong to her. After-hours prep photos, vendor runs, private menu previews, captions about long nights that always seemed to land when I was away. She had not been circling the edges of my marriage by accident, and the more I checked, the more obvious it became that she knew exactly where I stood and kept stepping closer anyway. The charge that settled everything was not dramatic, which was probably why it hit so hard. A linen rental invoice for 6 settings and winter florals near Lake Geneva. It was billed 3 days before Dean finally sat across from me and announced Christmas, which meant the trip had already been designed, softened, and arranged before I was officially removed. My work inbox was still open beneath those statements. The Seattle transfer offer waiting in clean black text. And for the first time, the real question was not why Dean had chosen Mallory, but why I was still shaping my future around a man who had already reshaped his around her. I accepted the Seattle offer that same night, not because I felt brave, but because the linen invoice, the hotel charges, and Dean's practiced voice had already closed the door behind me. The email was short, clean, and professional. The kind of message that gives nothing away about the fact that your marriage is ending in the next room. When I hit send, the only sound in the kitchen was the refrigerator humming and the faint scrape of sleet against the glass, and both felt steadier than my husband had in months. By 8 the next morning, Dean was dressed and halfway through his coffee, scrolling with his thumb and smiling at something he did not bother to hide from me anymore. He said he was meeting Mallory to finalize holiday vendor details, as if the problem between us were scheduling, not the fact that he had already assigned another woman my place. I watched him knot his scarf, listened to the door close behind him, and waited until his car pulled out before I opened my laptop again and started moving. The first call I made was to Sabrina Cole, whose voice had that clipped calm people earn by hearing bad marriages explained badly for a living. I told her the condo was in my name from before the marriage, that our shared account showed repeated spending tied to Mallory, and that Dean had used divorce as leverage when he thought leverage would keep me still. She asked for statements, dates, title documents, and proof of the holiday bookings, then said, without softness and without drama, send me everything before noon and do not warn him first. I built the file the way I had built every crisis at work. One clean line after another. Because panic gets sloppy, and sloppiness gives people like Dean room to pretend. I pulled the condo records, the shared card statements, the boutique hotel confirmations, the delivery receipts, and the screenshots from Mallory's stories. Then laid them beside the Seattle contract in separate folders on my desktop. The contrast was almost indecent. One screen showing months of deception in tidy transactions, the other offering better pay, steadier hours, and a life no longer arranged around someone else's appetite. Before noon, I sent Sabrina the full set of documents and booked a one-way flight to Seattle for the same day Dean planned to leave for Lake Geneva. I chose the seat, paid without hesitating, and felt something inside me go quiet. Not healed, not lighter, just no longer begging to be chosen by a man who had already made himself clear. When the confirmation landed in my inbox, I understood that the first turn in my life was not the job itself or even the city, but the fact that I had finally made a decision without telling Dean first. The morning Dean left for Lake Geneva, the condo looked untouched by truth, with his weekender by the door, wrapped bottles on the counter, and winter light on everything. He moved through the rooms with easy holiday focus, checking his phone, answering Mallory, and speaking in that relaxed tone people use when they think the next few days are secured. I came back mid-morning with my keys in my coat pocket and told him I had forgotten a few things for work, and he barely looked up before deciding I was harmless. He was wearing dark denim and the cashmere sweater I had bought him in October, and something about that detail made his confidence feel meaner than it had before. His phone lit up while he stood at the kitchen island, and the change in his face was immediate. Softer mouth, easier eyes, a smile he had not given me in months. When he noticed me noticing, he turned the screen face down and said Mallory was already at the lodge handling deliveries. Like that sentence belonged in ordinary married conversation. I asked whether everything was set, and he nodded toward the stacked gift boxes near the wall as if I were still helping manage the trip instead of being removed from it. Then he gave me the line he had already chosen for this version of himself. That when he got back, maybe we could talk like adults, if I was willing to be more flexible. It was the word flexible that stayed with me. Because his bag was packed. Mallory was waiting. And he was still speaking as if I were the one refusing reason. I told him I just needed to grab what I came for. And he accepted that too quickly. already halfway gone in his head, already living inside the holiday he had staged. That was when I understood silence was no longer surrender, because every second he stayed comfortable made what came next cleaner, colder, and harder to dispute. He picked up his keys, wished me a better attitude when he got back, and left the condo with the casual confidence of a man certain he would return to the same life. The place changed the second the door shut behind him, not in appearance, but in ownership, because the performance ended the moment there was no audience left to manage. I took off my wedding ring in our bedroom and set it on his pillow with a folded note that was short enough to leave no room for bargaining. I placed a second envelope on the kitchen table for the legal side, then sat at my desk and began closing every access point that still assumed Dean belonged inside my life. I canceled the secondary cards tied to my accounts, changed the passwords on every service billed under my name, and forwarded the updated records to Sabrina without rereading anything twice. Then I found Reed Sutton's email from an old holiday contact thread, attached the hotel charges, the shared card receipts, and the images that showed Dean and Mallory together clearly enough. I wrote one line in the subject field, "I think you should know the truth." Sent it, took my bag downstairs for the airport, and left without hurrying through the role they had already decided was over. Seattle felt strange in the way clean places do when you arrive, carrying the debris of a life that has already broken somewhere else. I slept for a few hours in the furnished apartment, woke to gray light against the windows, and turned my phone on knowing the silence was over. The messages loaded in order, and I watched Dean's holiday unravel in real time. First, the lodge fireplace, then the snowy drive, then a smug line about how I would love this place if I ever let myself slow down. The next messages came sharper because I had not answered. And silence was something Dean had always used as pressure, never something he expected back. He wrote that he had called the condo and gotten nothing, that I was being dramatic, that simple things always turned into problems with me. Then the tone shifted again, because somewhere between those texts and the next one, he had learned I was not in Chicago anymore, and whatever he thought he still controlled had started slipping. He asked why Seattle had called about my start date, then sent another message demanding to know what game I was playing. A minute later came the one that mattered. Shorter than the rest, stripped of performance, saying Reed had just left and Mallory was a mess, and none of this needed to happen. I read that line twice, not because it pleased me, but because it confirmed the email had reached the right man and the truth had entered the lodge before Dean could contain it. There was a voicemail too, his voice tight in a way I had never heard from him, asking me to call because things had gotten out of hand. What he did not say was that he was sorry for the hotel rooms, or the charges, or the holiday he built with another woman while still coming home to me. He was frightened because the weekend was no longer private. Reed had seen the receipts and the photos, and the version of himself Dean preferred had started collapsing in front of witnesses. I called once because I wanted to hear whether he understood what had actually ended, and he answered so fast it sounded like he had been staring at the screen. He rushed through excuses, saying Reed had overreacted, Mallory was upset, and I had blown apart something we could have handled privately. And I looked out at the wet Seattle street below my window and told him I had not blown apart anything. When he finally admitted he only used the word divorce to scare me back into place, I ended the call, forwarded every text and voicemail to Sabrina, and let the holiday Dean chose without me break under the weight of its own evidence. By the time mediation was scheduled, the story Dean had been telling himself no longer matched the paperwork. And paperwork was the only language that mattered now. I joined from Seattle with Sabrina beside me on screen, my files open, my notes clean, while Dean appeared from Chicago in a wrinkled button-down that looked slept in. He had the face of a man who still hoped tone could save him, as if enough regret in his voice might erase the boutique hotel invoices, the gift charges, and the holiday deposit tied to Lake Geneva. Sabrina began where truth always sounds least dramatic and does the most damage, with title records, account histories, and the date the condo entered my life long before Dean did. She laid out that the property was mine before the marriage, that the spending trail attached to Mallory repeated across months, and that the shared funds had not gone toward our household. Dean's attorney tried to turn it into a marriage, drifting apart under pressure. But the charges kept landing every few days with the same rhythm. Hotel, dinner, delivery, gift. And then another night, Dean had claimed he was working. Then Dean made the mistake people like him always make when they think emotion will soften evidence. Because he started talking before his lawyer could stop him. He said Mallory understood his schedule, understood the demands of the club, understood him in ways I had stopped trying to, and the room changed the second he said it. Sabrina did not even raise her voice when she answered that understanding was not the issue before the table. The issue was whether he had spent marital money building an outside relationship while still expecting me to fund the stability of his home. His attorney asked for a recess after that, but the damage had already settled into the record, and Dean looked like he knew it. Every time Sabrina named a charge, he had to watch the affair change shape, from something he thought was personal and complicated into something itemized, dated, and impossible to romanticize. Mallory did not attend, which mattered more than if she had, because by then Reed had already pulled out of their marriage, and the silence from her side said she was protecting herself first. The social fallout moved faster than Dean had expected, because private scandals do not stay private once they leave a money trail through enough people's inboxes. Reed filed to separate. 2 holiday clients quietly dropped Mallory from upcoming work, and one of Dean's silent partners asked him to step back from public-facing events until his personal situation stopped touching the business. No one needed me to tell them what had happened because the facts were already doing that work by themselves. 1 receipt, 1 booking, 1 date after another. When mediation resumed, Dean asked for fairness in a voice that still seemed to mean comfort for himself rather than consequence for what he had done. I looked at him on the screen and realized the strangest part was how small he seemed, now that I was no longer inside the version of him he used to keep me loyal. By the end of the session, the condo was no longer a place he could imagine returning to. The money was no longer abstract, and the life he had tried to split in 2 was closing around him with no room left to hide. 6 months later, my life in Seattle did not look dramatic from the outside, which was exactly why it felt so different from everything I had survived before. I slept through the night, ate breakfast without checking my phone for damage, and walked to work through streets that asked nothing from me except that I keep moving. The theater campus gave me a schedule with edges. Real evenings, real weekends, and enough quiet that I could finally hear my own thoughts without Dean's needs crowding them. I stopped measuring my worth against how indispensable I could make myself to someone else. And the proof was in the smallest things. The meals I finished. The books I returned on time. The mornings I did not brace. My apartment changed slowly with me. A lamp I chose because I liked the light. A chair by the window no one else had to approve. Shelves arranged for my eye instead of a shared idea of taste. Healing did not arrive as forgiveness or softness, but as the clean fact that I no longer wanted the woman back who had mistaken endurance for love. I met Graham Ellis on an ordinary afternoon inside the restoration wing of the theater, where he was cataloging old fabric and asked if the chair across from me was taken. He did not perform interest, did not study me for weaknesses, did not ask what had broken before asking what I liked. And when he smiled, nothing in me tightened. That was when I understood the final difference between the life I had left and the one I had built. Because Dean had always spoken as if I needed to become easier to keep. While standing beside Graham, I felt the quiet authority of a woman who no longer needed to be kept at all. Thank you for staying with me through this story and holding space for every hard truth inside it. If any part of it felt close to your own life, leave your thoughts below. And if peace has ever found you after loss, I hope it stays.